Hello to my wonderful community, and welcome to anyone new who's finding this channel for the first time. I'm Lena, and in today's video, it is going to be a little bit different, especially for a lot of my OG watchers who are familiar with my channel. It's going to be faceless. And to give you just all a little bit of context, I'm in the middle of packing right now, and things are just a little bit chaotic at home. But I didn't want to miss the chance to share this video with you on a few things that I discovered about the Titanic and the history of a few people I didn't know until recently who were passengers. So, for a lot of the people who may find this channel and are Titanic enthusiasts, I understand that you would probably know and are familiar with a lot of the people that I'm going to bring up. But I just wanted to also explain that for many of us who didn't really know much of the history of the Titanic, other than maybe watching the 1997 film from James Cameron and understanding that many people didn't even know about the older film that I'm going to also bring up, which is A Night to Remember. And I'll be using clips from both movies while I go through this video, the black and white version in 1958 and the James Cameron version as well. For many of us, we would have gone to see the movie, of course, and enjoyed it, but this was before Google and the widespread of being able to find information online. So most of us who left the theater would leave the theater and not really go back and check on the historical records or understand who the passengers that were actually portrayed in the film. And even though right now there are a lot of Titanic enthusiasts and people who are really, really doing this service really proud, many of us walked away from the theater, went home, and that was it. And we didn't, unless you were actually going to a library or you were going into maybe a bookstore and you became, a fanatic about it, we didn't really think too much about it other than the once a year trope, or I should say, newsreel that would pop up every anniversary on the television. If there was a documentary and you happen to catch it, great. But you also have to think that there's an entire generation from 1997 until today that probably has not even seen the James Cameron rendition of Titanic. And, for me back then, I was moved by the movie, but I didn't really rewatch it. Only maybe one other time if it popped up on a cable channel, because that was before streaming as well. But it wasn't something that I had actively looked into. So finding out some of the things that I found out today that I'm bringing all to you is relatively new to me. So for anyone who has not watched it or has watched it and never thought about it, I hope I bring some new perspective. And for the Titanic enthusiasts, I appreciate your time in watching this channel, and you can chime in and add any context that you wish to some of the things that I brought up. So I hope you enjoy this video. Let's get on with it. So I'm packing up and getting ready to move by the end of this month, and I wanted to find something to watch on TV, and I saw that the 1997 James Cameron film Titanic came up on my streaming service. I had not seen that film in so many years, so I thought, hey, why not? I'll see it again. It's almost 3 hours long. It's a good way to pack up. But something told me to check out what other Titanic films were available too. So I found the 1958 classic A Night to Remember, based on the Walter Lord's book in 1955. Then I decided to check out this film first. Between the 1958 film A Night to Remember and James Cameron's 1997 blockbuster Titanic, I noticed something I had never caught before. Within these two films, a connection between three American department store dynasties. I rewatched both films, and one couple kept standing out. In the 1958 film, there's a husband and wife, whereas the wife refuses to be separated from her husband. In the film, the wife is reported to have said, "I will not be separated from my husband. As we have lived, so we will die together." Nearly 40 years later, James Cameron's Titanic echoes that same moment. The couple is shown lying side by side in their bed, quietly waiting as the icy water begins to fill their cabin, but there's no dialogue between them. After watching both films, it suddenly hit me that these two portrayals felt like they were showing the same couple. That realization set me down a research path that led me to the real people behind those scenes, which were Isidore and Ida Strauss. What I didn't realize until now was that Ida Strauss was directly connected to the iconic Macy's flagship store in Herald Square. Both Isidore Strauss and his co-owner was the co-owner of Macy's alongside his brother Nathan. I was surprised because growing up, the Strauss name was far more familiar to me through Abraham and Strauss stores. They had locations across New York and New Jersey at the time. In 1995, all of the Abraham Strauss locations were officially closed or converted into Macy's or Stern department stores. But one location was converted to Bloomingdale stores, and another was sold to Sears department stores. Since this all happened while I was growing up, I actually remember shopping at Abraham and Strauss, never knowing their story traced all the way back to the Titanic. In 1893, Isidor Straus and his brother Nathan purchased a controlling interest in Abraham and Straus. Just 3 years later, in 1896, the brothers gained full ownership of R.H. Macy and Company. When I came across this timeline, something clicked in my mind suddenly. One of my favorite holiday movies didn't quite line up the way I had assumed. In 1947, the classic movie A Miracle on 34th Street, a major plot point centers on the fierce competition between Macy's and Gimbel stores. They are portrayed in the film by actors as competing store who run the stores themselves. But knowing what I know now, the portrayal felt off. I've always loved the original film, but revisiting the real history made me realize that the store behind the competition is far more complicated than the movie ever lets on. I'm old enough to remember Gimbel's before it shut down in 1987. For years, my mom took my brother and me to shop at both Gimbel's and Macy's, though Macy's was always her favorite, and honestly, it became ours too. So when I decided to watch A Miracle on 34th Street, the competition between Mr. Gimbel and R.H. Macy never felt too far-fetched for its time. I completely believe those men portrayed in the movie were real enactments of the owners, exactly as the movie portrayed them and fitting for the era it was released. It wasn't until recently that I realized the truth was far more complicated than the story. When I discovered that R.H. Macy couldn't have possibly been the owner of Macy's during the making of A Miracle on 34th Street, R.H. Macy had already died in 1877. In the mid 1890s, control of Macy's had already passed to Isidor Straus and his brother Nathan. The Strauss family remained in control until 1929, when Macy's was merged into the Federated Department Stores, officially ending their ownership. Which means that at the time of the Titanic's disaster in 1912, the owners of Macy's were none other than Isidor and Ida Strauss, the very couple whose story quietly appears in both Titanic films. As for Gimbel's, in the movie A Miracle on 34th Street, portrays Mr. Gimbel, but here's the twist. There is no real historical figure by that name. In the movie, the Gimbel's executives are just fictional stand-ins. The real Gimbel's families did exist. Figures like Adam Gimbel, Bernard Gimbel, and other Gimbel brothers and descendants ran the company, but none of them are portrayed or named in the film. What really blew me away is that I never questioned any of this before. I never looked into the real history behind the movie or these retail giants until I recently watched A Night to Remember and the Titanic movie. But the rabbit hole didn't stop there. As I kept digging through the passengers' names, one more jumped out at me. Andrew Sachs, the founder of Saks Fifth Avenue, yet another retail giant, and once again connected to the Herald Square location, just about a mile away from Macy's and Gimbel's. My mom only took my brother and me into Saks a handful of times, but I do remember in the later years, the Christmas light show Saks started in 2004, something that became part of the city's holiday magic. So when Saks canceled the light show in 2024, it shocked a lot of people. And when it finally returned in 2025, it felt like a small piece of New York City had come back. And that's when it hit me how many other stories are hiding in plain sight. As I dug deeper into the history, something immediately stood out. Andrew Sachs was listed in the Titanic records, but not because he was on the ship. He died on April 8th, 1912, just 7 days before the Titanic sank. His daughter, Leah Sachs Meyer, and her husband, Edgar J. Meyer, purchased a last-minute ticket to travel to New York for Andrew Sachs's funeral. Those tickets put them right aboard the Titanic. Leah survived the sinking. Edgar did not. His body was never recovered. And in that moment, I realized how closely grief, chance, and history were on that ship. During the evacuation, when women and children were being loaded into the lifeboats, Leah later described one of the hardest moments of her life. She said she tried again and again to get Edgar to step into the lifeboat with her. She even begged to stay behind and wait, but he refused, unwilling to leave while other women and children were still on the ship. In the end, Edgar persuaded her to go, reminding her of their 1 year old child waiting at home. She entered the lifeboat and watched the Titanic slip beneath the water. For only a brief moment, she could still see her husband standing by the rail, helping other women into boats in which he himself might have been saved had he been able to enter any of them. What struck me next was the growing connection between the three iconic department stores: Saks Fifth Avenue, Gimbel's, and Macy's. After Andrew Sachs died on April to his son, Horace Sachs. But here's what surprised me the most. The iconic Saks Fifth Avenue store didn't exist at the time. There were only stores in Washington, D.C. and other locations at that time. When Andrew Sachs passed away and when his daughter and son-in-law boarded the ill-fated Titanic, the legendary Saks Fifth Avenue store had not been open yet. The Saks Fifth Avenue store opened on September 15, 1924, more than a decade after the Titanic. And when it finally did, it opened on 611 Fifth Avenue between 49th and 50th Streets in Midtown Manhattan, just about a mile away from Macy's at Herald Square and nearby Gimbel's, still operating at the time. The store was opened by Horace Sachs, the son of Andrew Sachs and the brother of Leah Sachs Mayer, alongside Bernard Gimbel, a descendant of the original Gimbel family. Yep, that Gimbel. From the very company portrayed as Macy's rival in the movie A Miracle on 34th Street. I had no clue that Gimbels had any stake in the Saks Fifth Avenue company until now. And suddenly, what I thought were separate retail stories, Macy's, Gimbels, and Saks, started to feel like chapters of the same book. What I learned next tied everything together for me. The Sachs and Gimbel families weren't just business associates, they were connected through marriage. Horace Sachs and Bernard Gimbel were brother in laws. And this just wasn't a social connection, it shaped retail history. That family trust helped make the 1923 deal possible for Gimbels to acquire Saks. But instead of absorbing it completely, a rare decision was made. Saks Fifth Avenue would remain autonomous, upscale, and distinct. Together, they opened the Saks Fifth Avenue in 1924, redefining what luxury retail looked like in America. What once seemed like competition and coincidences now felt intentional. These families weren't just competing, they were building something together. With that much retail power, you might expect Gimbel's and Saks Fifth Avenue to have completely kicked Macy's butt over the decades. But history took a very different turn. Hi, editing Lena here. Sorry for the mistake on the Sachs and Gimbel family relationship through marriage. That was an error. And unfortunately, I couldn't go back and repair that without having to re record the entire sequence again. So I figured I'd come in and do a quick recap and just say that they were never related by actual marriage, but they were strictly business partners. So, the Sax and Gimbal, they were very close together, but it was more so towards the actual business partnership. So, editing Lena, thank you for your patience. Sorry for the error. And I hope you appreciate the fact that I could not just go back and re record the entire sequence. Thank you. Now let's get on with the rest of the actual show. Goodbye. In 1973, both Gimbel's and Saks were acquired by Brown and Williamson. Gimbel stores were eventually liquidated in 1987. Saks was later sold to Investacorp in 1990. And now, as of 2026, the Saks Group is reportedly preparing for bankruptcy after missing a major debt payment. Meanwhile, Macy's, despite closing many locations in these last few years, has held on to its iconic Herald Square store. The company has recently raised its full year outlook and reported its strongest comparable sales growth in over 3 years, signaling that its turnaround plan may be finally working. So, while some giants faded and others struggled to survive, Macy's is still standing proof that in retail history, power alone doesn't decide who lasts. Today, we move around the world with ease by planes, trains, cars, even by ships. God help us, they're getting bigger and bigger as I grow. Travel feels more routine, almost effortless. But in 1912, the world was very different. Airplanes did exist, but they were dangerous, unreliable, and incredibly expensive, used mostly for military purposes, mail delivery, or short demonstration flights. They weren't realistic options for everyday people. So, if you wanted to travel to Europe, there was only one way to go by ocean liner. Transatlantic passenger flights didn't exist yet, which is why ships like the Titanic weren't just luxury vessels, they were lifelines. They carried dreams, families, businesses, and entire futures across the Atlantic. And that's what made the Titanic more than a ship. It was the only way forward for so many families. It's almost impossible for me to wrap my head around how one ship could carry so much history within its passengers. So many of them were connected to people, places, and institutions we recognize today. Connections we can now uncover with just a few clicks on the internet. God, we have come a long way. And it makes me wonder about how many other stories on board were on board, the passengers we don't talk about, the lives we don't fully know, how their journeys, whether big or small, quietly shaped the world we live in now. The Titanic wasn't just filled with people, it was filled with their futures. And not all of them were meant to arrive. One ship, three major retail names so close to each other in New York shared a strange and unexpected connection to the Titanic. Macy's, through Isidore and Ida Strauss, who were both on board and did not survive. Saks Fifth Avenue, through Andrew Saks's daughter, Leah Saks Meyer, who lived while her husband was lost at sea. And Gimbels, Macy's longtime rival, quietly woven into Saks's expansion. And Legacy, through family ties and business partnerships. What stunned me was realizing that one of my favorite holiday films, A Miracle on 34th Street, built on its famous competition on characters who were never really existed. Neither R.H. Macy nor Mr. Gimble were real figures during the time of the making of the movie. What I always thought were separate stories of retail history, Hollywood, and the Titanic turned out to be deeply connected. All of it traced back to one ship. These were the stories I wanted to focus on first, but there are others on board as well as stories many people already know, yet still unbelievable. And one that most may already know is John Jacob Astor IV, the son of Caroline Astor, who famously ruled the New York High Society as the leader of the 400. The same Caroline Astor portrayed in HBO's The Gilded Age. For anyone that is watching that show now, you might be more familiar with the character. She passed away in 1908, so she was not alive when her son died on the Titanic. John Jacob Astor IV is often depicted in the Titanic films alongside his young pregnant wife in one of the most recognizable stories from the voyage. His story is widely remembered, not just because of how he died, but because he was one of the richest people on board. At the time of his death in 1912, Astor's fortune was estimated around $87 million. Adjusted for inflation alone, that would equal roughly 2.5 to 3 billion today. And when you look at his wealth in terms of influence and economic power, historians often compare Astor to modern day titans like Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, and Bill Gates. Astor wasn't just wealthy, he was powerful, and old New York money lost in a single night at sea. But it's the quieter connections, the ones hiding in plain sight, that drew me into digging deeper into these movies and share this with you all. And not all may know about it. Because sometimes the stories we think we already know still have something new to reveal. Another notable passenger, also portrayed in multiple Titanic films, was Benjamin Guggenheim. He came from one of New York's most influential families. His uncle, Solomon R. Guggenheim, would later lend his name to one of the city's most iconic landmarks, the Guggenheim Art Museum. Benjamin Guggenheim did not survive the sinking, but his final moments became legendary. In the 1958 film A Night to Remember, Benjamin Guggenheim is portrayed as calm, dignified, and fully aware of his fate. Once it became clear that the ship will sink, he changes into his formal evening wear and quietly accepts what's coming, choosing composure over panic. In that moment, he delivers the line that defines his legacy. We've dressed up in our best, and we are prepared to go down like gentlemen. It's a choice that turns a moment of tragedy into one of the most unforgettable scenes in Titanic film history. That same moment is echoed decades in Titanic, the movie, where Guggenheim initially appears casually dressed. But once the reality sets in, he puts on a tuxedo and delivers the same line that sealed his place in history. We are dressed in our best, and we are prepared to go down as gentlemen. In a night defined by chaos and fear, Benjamin Guggenheim chose dignity, and that choice is why his story still endures. I cannot go out without mentioning another notable passenger, Margaret Brown, better known today as the unsinkable Molly Brown. Before the Titanic, Margaret Brown had already lived an extraordinary life. Born into poverty in Missouri, she rose into wealth after marrying a mining engineer, J. Brown, whose work helped make their fortune. She became known for her independence, philanthropy, and outspoken support of labor rights, women's causes, and education. By 1912, Margaret Brown was traveling aboard the Titanic as a first class passenger. In the 1958 film, A Night to Remember, her portrayal reflects that real life strength. She's shown as a practical, compassionate, and unwilling to stay silent. Once in the lifeboat, she urges the crew to turn back and search for survivors in the water, challenging authority not just for attention, but because it was the right damn thing to do. The film shows her as they truly was a woman of conviction, courage, and morale, clarity in the middle of unmanageable chaos. In James Cameron 1997 Titanic, Molly Brown is played by Kathy Bates. She's portrayed very differently than in the film of 1958. She brought into life with warmth, humor, and heart, serving as both emotional, grounding, and moral conscious. She famously befriends the fictional character played by Leonardo DiCaprio, Jack Dawson, helping him navigate first class society. The events of the night of the Titanic sank still shock me to this day. The lack of lifeboats, the fact that so many were launched half full, and even knowing that, it's haunting to realize that there still would have not been enough lifeboats to save everyone, even if every single one of them had been filled. There's no way to know who would have lived and who would have been lost, but it's impossible not to think about how many more lives could have been saved. That's what stays with me. Most is how deeply these stories connect to places I've walked into my entire life. Stores like Macy's, Gimbel's, and Saks Fifth Avenue without ever realizing the history behind the names. Families I never thought twice about. Lives forever tied into one night in 1912. And now, every time I watch the films or read about the Titanic, I just don't see a ship. I see the people. I see the choices and the legacies and potential legacies that never made it home. Listen, I enjoyed both movies, but in very different ways. In the 1958 film A Night to Remember, The film was mostly focused on the accuracy of the events and the passenger's experience. And the film still holds up today with its visuals. Even in black and white, it still looks clean, crisp. Considering the limited film technology of its time, it's really beautiful to actually watch. Highly recommend that if you can find it, to take a look at it. It still holds up today, and even the sinking itself, even though it was not accurate for the time because it shows the ship going down as one full ship. We only found out later in the late 1980s that the ship did indeed break up into two pieces, which is why the 1997 film Titanic is undeniably cinematic, especially the sinking of itself, because it depicts the sinking as it was recorded after we found out 70 years later in the late 80s that the ship actually did break in half, which feels both visually stunning and very hauntingly real. But I always go back and forth on James Cameron's decision to center the story around the fictional characters of Jack and Rose. Yes, they are compelling to watch and they draw you in emotionally. But part of me wishes that he would have seen that same level of focus placed on the real passengers instead. I wish he had included more information about the notable passengers who weren't always as well known in the general public or frequently discussed in the Titanic films. And yet, despite that, the film still breaks my heart every time. Even though Jack and Rose were fictional, the suffering shown among the passengers and crew were painfully real. The fear, the chaos, the loss of those moments belong to thousands of passengers who lived through that night and many who didn't. And that's what stays with me. Tragic as it is to say, one thing that we can be grateful is for this. The Titanic didn't just change how ships were built. It changed how human life was valued at sea. After 1912, ships were required to carry enough lifeboats for everyone on board. Lifeboat drills became mandatory. Crews had to be properly trained. The disaster also led to the creation of the International Convention for the Safety of Life at Sea, or also known as SOLAS, a global safety agreement that still governs ships' constructions today, emergency procedures, fire safety, and radio communication. Ships were also required to maintain a 24-hour radio watch, ensuring distress calls would never be missed again. The International Ice Patrol was also created to monitor icebergs, and ships' designs were permanently improved. The idea of an unsinkable ship was finally abandoned. Because of the Titanic, maritime travel became far safer and passengers' lives became a legal priority, not just an afterthought. So if you ever find yourself on a ship, pay attention to the safety briefing. No matter how large or modern vessels may be, and we all see how they're getting bigger day by day, the ocean, no matter what, is always bigger. And knowing what to do might just save your life. This discovery was very interesting and enlightening to me. That's why I wanted to share this with you. And if nothing else, I hope it reminds you to hold on to the people you love just a little bit tighter tonight and feel grateful for the chance to step into a brand new year ahead. Listen, I want to thank you all for watching. And if you haven't yet subscribed, I'd love for you to consider joining my amazing community. Be sure to check out some of my other videos that I am not faceless in, and I have more videos to come for the new year and a podcast. And I really hope that you all enjoyed this and you can bring in some of your comments, discoveries. Did you know about any of this? Were you aware of it or were blindsided just as I was? Because this was really enlightening for me. I would love for this to go out to people who are Titanic enthusiasts and would love the opportunity to converse with you as well, because I think that these stories are so important, not just for the fact that we have history, but I think somehow, somewhere, history is not being taught properly or talked about enough. Believe it or not, if you can actually believe it, unless you're actively searching online for certain events. And there's some amazing people doing documentary, not just on that Titanic, but on just other ships that have been, lost at sea that I would love to bring to you. And I don't know why, but I'm getting a hankering. I really want to get more deep into some of the unknown notable people that are never even talked about on the Titanic ship and do a video about that. If you guys are interested in seeing something like that, drop me a comment, like, and share this video out. And I'll be more than happy to incorporate this into my weekly repertoire of videos that I'm going to bring to you for the wonderful year of 2026. So, from here to around the world that I reach, I wish you a blessed day, a blessed weekend, a blessed week, and a blessed new year ahead. Thank you, everyone. Goodbye. Mwah.